Let's move to second-tier powers, at least what I call second-tier powers, like Canada and EU. We talked quite a bit about the two already, but again, scenarios from mild to extreme, least likely to most likely, by 2035 or something along those lines, or in that era. Is it more likely, or where do you put, let's say, Canada becoming the United States or being annexed by the United States, or Canada and Mexico and the US forming a sort of North American European Union where it's essentially one big market, versus the United States maybe taking over Canada?
Well, again, I want to be abundantly clear.
You're not
I
making a
cannot.
call, but
Yeah, I'm not making a call, and neither am I going to assign distinct likelihood, unlikelihood to things, purely because that's making a call in a way. If you say, here's an option, but it's 0.0001% chance of happening, you're basically saying it won't happen. I do, having said that, think it's staggeringly unlikely that Canada becomes the 51st state for many, many reasons, and I'm sure Canadians understand them perfectly well. But if you understand Trump's traditional rhetoric, which is A, throw a grenade into the room to blow up, or, perceive norms and shift the Overton window by removing the window and the wall and the roof, and then start a discussion, it does appear logical, not probable, but logical, that the US goal is, as I said, an expanded and deepened USMCA, where the US is much more dominant within it. For example, saying we want this area of the value chain in this particular sector. We need this to start with, and trading that off for, an EU-style common external tariff, which, of course, technically would be written by all three, but in reality would be written by the US. And if you look at that, that does imply loss of economic sovereignty for Canada or Mexico. Of course it does, as it does in Europe. Germany and France don't have economic sovereignty because they can't set their own trade policy. Europe does that. So the ironic thing there, again, hypothetically, is that you'd be talking about someone who hates the EU, Donald Trump, proposing a North American equivalent in a way, but just without any of the social or cultural trappings. It would be just much more in terms of this is a laissez-faire union with strict border security. I don't think that's going to change, and I don't think there'll be free movement. Although over time, you could possibly make the argument that may happen with Canada. There might be a GDP per capita. I'm sorry?
Not Mexico, though.
No. I'm sure there might be like a GDP per capita threshold. Like if Mexico ever gets to here in GDP per capita, then we can start talking about it, etc., etc. But as it stands, you can't see that flying. But it would be largely a very deregulated, and again, that would involve Canada deregulating, because there's a lot of regulation within Canada between provinces, which I understand is now being discussed. But equally, alongside within the US, like deregulation, behind one unified bloc. And that's logical from a statecraft perspective, because let me just stress the alternative from a US statecraft perspective. If you're sitting in Washington, D.C., thinking like this is a board game, for global hegemony, and Canada and Mexico won't sign up for that. They adamantly refuse. We are not going to be part of that. It doesn't look good for Canada or Mexico. It's existential to the US from a grand strategy perspective to turn around and say, well, if you're not with us, you're against us. This is not new. And I would urge anyone thinking this is ridiculous or hyperbole to go back and read the classics. The Melian Dialogue. You're familiar with what I'm talking about? Yeah. This is the Melian Dialogue in 2025. It doesn't have to end like that. I certainly hope it doesn't. I mean, not just literally in terms of what happened to Milos, but I mean, it doesn't have to end that badly. But one has to recognize that when you're dealing with a very large power, which is turning around now in a self-interested, realist, realpolitik way and saying, we see the world like this, there are limits to what one can then turn around and say, well, we don't see it like that because we think this is still the liberal world order, because it probably isn't.
Just to refresh my own mind and maybe the audience mind, the Melian Dialogue, essentially Athens going to Milos, the small city, Milos, small city state during the Peloponnesian War, and saying, either you're with us or you're with Sparta. And you cannot stand this. If you're neutrally essentially against us, and therefore Melius says we're willing to take our chances and we'll resist whatever offer you're bringing, and Athens torches the city.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and basically, yeah, I'm simplifying. A classicist would be horrified at the reductivity of it. But effectively, you can't just turn around and say, we've never been your enemy. We wish you well, but we're free to do what we want. Because a greater power will be paranoid and will say, we can't have that. At the very least, forget about the torching and, the old world nastiness.